Don't skip. Stop for just a moment, because what you are about to hear may explain a feeling you have been carrying for far longer than you realize. There are moments in life that pass without anyone noticing, conversations that disappear into the background, words spoken behind closed doors that never reach the person they were truly meant for. Yet sometimes those unseen moments become the reason everything changes. This is one of those moments. While you continued living your life, believing no one truly understood your heart, someone quietly stood between you and unfair judgment. Your soulmate heard things being said about you when you were not there to defend yourself. They had every opportunity to remain silent. They could have looked away like everyone else. They could have allowed the conversation to continue without saying a single word. But something inside them refused to let that happen. Stay with this story, because every passing moment reveals another piece of a truth that has been hidden from you. What happened next was never planned. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. But it was powerful enough to change the way your soulmate sees you forever. At first they simply listened. They allowed every opinion, every assumption, every careless sentence to fill the room. Some people believed they understood your intentions. Others claimed they knew your story. They spoke with confidence even though they had never walked through your pain, never carried your burdens, never witnessed the quiet battles you fought when no one was watching. Your soulmate remained silent for a few moments, not because they agreed, but because they wanted to understand everything before speaking. Deep inside their heart they already sensed something was wrong. The version of you being described did not match the person they had slowly come to know. They remembered your kindness when nobody thanked you. They remembered your patience when life became unfair. They remembered the way you continued showing compassion even after being disappointed again and again. Those memories stood stronger than every accusation floating around that room. Then something unexpected happened. Without raising their voice, without trying to impress anyone, your soulmate finally spoke. The room became quieter than anyone expected. They said that people often judge what they never take time to understand. They reminded everyone that strength is sometimes mistaken for coldness, silence is mistaken for weakness, and kindness is often mistaken for something that can be ignored. They told everyone that your story deserved more respect than careless opinions. No one expected those words to come from them. Some people looked surprised. Others became uncomfortable because they realized they had spoken too quickly. Yet your soulmate did not stop. They continued defending the parts of your heart you have spent years protecting from the world. They spoke about your resilience. They spoke about your honesty. They spoke about the quiet courage you carry even when life feels impossibly heavy. Every sentence they shared came from genuine admiration rather than obligation. They were not trying to win an argument. They were protecting someone who was not even there to witness it. And perhaps that is what made their words so meaningful. True loyalty often reveals itself when there is nothing to gain. Your soulmate gained nothing by standing beside your name that day, yet they chose to do it anyway. After the conversation ended, something remained inside their heart. They realized that defending you had awakened emotions they could no longer ignore. Until that moment they believed their feelings were simple admiration. But suddenly they understood those feelings had quietly become something much deeper. Protecting your reputation felt natural because your happiness had already become important to them. They could not explain why your pain affected them so strongly. They only knew that hearing unfair words about you hurt more than they expected. That realization stayed with them long after everyone else forgot the conversation. As the evening continued, they replayed every moment in their mind. They wondered whether you had any idea that someone had stood up for you without expecting recognition. They imagined how often you must have felt alone while carrying misunderstandings that were never your fault. They wished they could somehow tell you that not everyone believed the worst. They wished you could see yourself through their eyes instead of through the opinions of people who never truly understood you. That night your soulmate could not easily fall asleep. Your name kept returning to their thoughts in the quiet moments between waking and dreaming. They remembered little details about you that most people overlooked. The way you cared more than you admitted. The way you carried disappointment without turning bitter. The way you continued hoping even after hope had been tested countless times. Each memory quietly reminded them why defending you felt like the only honest thing to do. Meanwhile, you continued your life completely unaware that somewhere, beyond your sight, your name had become the center of a conversation that ended very differently because one heart chose courage over silence. Sometimes destiny moves through ordinary conversations rather than extraordinary miracles. Sometimes love begins not with grand declarations but with simple acts of loyalty. Your soulmate may never have planned to reveal their heart that day, yet every word they spoke exposed emotions they had carefully hidden even from themselves. They realized that your peace mattered to them. Your future mattered to them. Your reputation mattered to them because somewhere along the journey their heart had quietly decided that you mattered. Since that day they have looked at you differently. Every new conversation, every memory, every unexpected reminder has only strengthened the respect growing inside them. They no longer see you as just another person crossing their path. They see someone whose heart deserves protection, whose kindness deserves recognition, and whose future deserves happiness. Even when doubt tries to whisper into their mind, the memory of that conversation returns. It reminds them why they refuse to remain silent. It reminds them that truth becomes stronger when someone has the courage to speak it. Perhaps you have recently felt an unexplained shift, a quiet sense that something unseen has been changing around you. Perhaps certain memories have returned without warning, or your heart has been gently preparing for a chapter you cannot yet describe. Sometimes those feelings arrive because invisible moments are already shaping visible outcomes. The defense your soulmate offered was not simply about correcting misunderstandings. It was the beginning of their own emotional awakening. They discovered that standing beside you felt more natural than standing with the crowd. They discovered that your happiness had become connected to theirs in ways they never expected. And every day since then that connection has quietly continued growing. There will come a time when hidden truths no longer remain hidden. Conversations that once happened in secret eventually reveal their purpose. Hearts that once remained silent eventually gather enough courage to speak honestly. Until then, remember this. Not every battle fought for you happens where your eyes can see it. Some of the greatest acts of loyalty happen in rooms you never enter, through words you never hear, spoken by people whose hearts have already chosen you long before they ever found the courage to say so. Your soulmate's decision to defend you was never about proving a point to others. It was about protecting something precious that had already begun growing inside their own heart, and from that quiet moment forward, nothing about the way they feel for you has ever been the same. Stay with this moment, because the part of the story that was hidden from you is slowly beginning to rise to the surface, and in this fictional emotional journey, your soulmate's silence after defending you was not empty silence at all. It was the kind of silence that happens when a person realizes they have crossed an invisible line inside their own heart. After they stood up for you, after they challenged every careless word spoken against you, they walked away carrying something heavier than they expected. They thought the conversation would end there, that once they spoke the truth, their heart would become calm again. But that did not happen. Instead, your name kept echoing inside them like a message they could no longer ignore. They remembered the faces of the people who had judged you without knowing your full story, and then they remembered your face, your quiet strength, your tired smile, the way you kept going even when life gave you reasons to stop. Something about that contrast shook them deeply. They began asking themselves why it hurt so much to hear your name treated unfairly. Why did their chest tighten when someone misunderstood you? Why did they feel protective of a heart they had not fully claimed out loud? The answer was uncomfortable, beautiful, and impossible to deny. They cared for you more than they had admitted. They cared in a way that was no longer casual, no longer simple, no longer easy to hide behind excuses. Do not skip this part, because this is where their feelings started turning into realization. They began to understand that loyalty is not always planned. Sometimes it comes out suddenly, naturally, honestly, because the heart recognizes who matters before the mind finds the courage to confess it. And from that day forward, whenever someone mentioned you, your soulmate listened differently. They no longer allowed others to define you. They no longer accepted half-truths about you. In their mind, they had already seen enough of your spirit to know that you deserved more gentleness than the world had given you. And while you were somewhere else, unaware of everything, this one secret act of defense became a turning point in their inner world. They started noticing how often your name returned to them in ordinary moments. A song, a sentence, a quiet evening, a sudden memory, a feeling they could not explain. Each reminder pulled them closer to a truth they were trying to avoid. They realized that defending you was not the beginning of their care, it was the proof that their care had been growing for a long time. They had been watching your patience. They had been noticing your honesty. They had been remembering your pain. They had been respecting your heart in silence. And now silence no longer felt safe, because silence had almost allowed others to misunderstand you. Something important changed inside them. They started feeling a responsibility toward the truth of you, not because you asked for it, not because you expected it, but because their heart could not betray what it already knew. In this fictional story, they sat alone later and replayed everything they had said. Part of them wondered if they had said too much. Another part wished they had said even more. They wished they had told everyone that people like you are rare, not because you are perfect, but because you keep loving even after being wounded, you keep showing softness even after being forced to become strong, you keep believing in goodness even after people gave you reasons to close your heart. That is what moved them. That is what made them protective. They were not defending an image. They were defending a soul they had slowly learned to respect. And somewhere deep within that realization, a quiet fear appeared. What if they waited too long? What if someone else saw your worth more clearly? What if you began believing the wrong voices because the right voice stayed silent? That thought unsettled them. For the first time, they understood that love is not only about feeling something. It is also about choosing courage when fear tells you to stay hidden. They knew they could not keep standing at a distance forever. Still, they were afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of timing, afraid that their past silence had already hurt you more than they knew. But every fear was now standing against one powerful memory, the moment they defended you and felt peace in doing so. That peace became proof. It told them that choosing you was not confusion. It was clarity. It told them that protecting your name felt right because honoring your heart felt right. And slowly, their emotions began shifting from hidden concern into a deeper desire to reach you, to speak honestly, to let you know that you were not as alone as you once believed. Meanwhile, your own heart may have been feeling tired, as if you had given too much to people who never fully understood your intentions. You may have wondered why certain chapters felt unfair, why some people judged you from the outside, why your kindness was questioned instead of cherished. But in this story, the answer is arriving softly. Not everyone misunderstood you. Someone saw. Someone listened. Someone remembered. Someone chose your side when there was no audience, no reward, no applause. And that kind of loyalty carries a different kind of power. It does not need to announce itself loudly. It changes the energy of everything quietly. After that day, your soulmate began watching the world around you with more awareness. They noticed who spoke with sincerity and who spoke from ego. They noticed how easily people form opinions about a person without knowing the nights they survived. They began seeing your journey not as something simple, but as something sacred in its own human way, full of battles, lessons, patience, and quiet victories. That made their respect grow even stronger. They started feeling proud of you in moments you did not even know were being seen. Proud of the way you kept moving. Proud of the way you did not let bitterness become your identity. Proud of the way your heart still carried hope. And the more they saw, the more they understood that their defense of you was only the first sign of something deeper. Their heart was preparing to stand beside you, not just in one conversation, but in life. Yet before they could come forward, they had to face themselves. They had to admit where they had been silent before. They had to accept that fear had delayed words that should have been spoken sooner. This realization was not easy. It made them emotional in a way they did not expect. They thought about moments when you may have needed reassurance but did not receive it. They thought about times when you may have looked strong while secretly wishing someone would simply understand. And for the first time, they wanted to be that person, not in fantasy, not in empty promises, but in real presence, real care, real honesty. Do not miss this detail, because it matters. Their defense of you was not a performance. It was a mirror. It showed them who they become when your name is involved. It showed them that they are braver when your heart is at stake. It showed them that love, even when unspoken, can push a person to act with unexpected strength. And now that strength is growing. It is moving them closer to a decision. They may still appear calm on the outside, but inside, 1,000 quiet thoughts are gathering into one truth: you deserve to know that someone stood for you. You deserve to know that someone believed in your goodness. You deserve to know that your story was not left undefended. In the coming part of this fictional journey, their heart is no longer only remembering you, it is preparing for contact, preparing for honesty, preparing to break the distance that fear created. They are beginning to realize that the longer they hide, the heavier their silence becomes. Because once a person defends you in your absence, it becomes harder for them to pretend you are ordinary in their presence. They know now that you are not ordinary to them. You have become the name that makes them pause, the thought that softens them, the memory that pulls truth out of their heart. And even if you cannot see it yet, something has already shifted. The version of them that could ignore their feelings is fading. The version that is rising now is more honest, more aware, more ready to protect what matters. So hold this close, not as a promise from the universe, but as the emotional truth of this story. The people who truly value you will not always be the loudest in front of you, but they will reveal themselves by what they choose when you are not in the room. Your soulmate chose respect. They chose truth. They chose your side. And from that moment, the distance between their hidden feelings and their honest confession became smaller than ever before. The days that followed did not bring dramatic changes that everyone could see. Instead, they unfolded through quiet moments that only your soulmate seemed to notice. In this fictional story, every ordinary day carried a small reminder of you. A familiar place, a passing conversation, a song playing in the background, or even a simple silence somehow brought your name back into their thoughts. They tried convincing themselves that they were simply overthinking what had happened, but the more they resisted those feelings, the stronger they became. They remembered the exact expressions on people's faces when they defended you. They remembered the hesitation that filled the room after they spoke. More importantly, they remembered the strange sense of peace that settled inside them afterward. It was a peace they had not expected, the kind that only appears when someone finally acts according to their heart instead of their fear. That single moment quietly became one of the most meaningful memories they carried. They found themselves wondering how many other times you had faced judgment without knowing that someone believed in you. They imagined the invisible weight you must have carried whenever people misunderstood your intentions. Those thoughts stayed with them late into the night. They wished they could somehow erase every unfair word that had ever reached your heart. Of course, they knew they could not rewrite the past, but they also knew they could choose who they would become from this moment forward. That realization changed the way they looked at every decision. They became more careful with their words, more thoughtful with their actions, and more determined never to let silence become the reason truth remained hidden again. As the weeks passed, they noticed something unexpected within themselves. Every time they pictured your future, they wanted it to be filled with peace rather than struggle, with understanding rather than misunderstanding, with people who recognized your kindness instead of questioning it. They realized that wishing for someone else's happiness without expecting anything in return was changing them from the inside. Their feelings were no longer built on imagination alone. They had become rooted in admiration, respect, and gratitude for the person they believed you truly were. Even during ordinary conversations with other people, they caught themselves comparing every act of honesty, every display of compassion, and every example of quiet strength to the qualities they had already seen in you. No one else seemed to leave the same impression. It surprised them because they had never planned for their heart to move in this direction. Yet the truth became impossible to ignore. In this fictional journey, your absence had begun teaching them the value of your presence. They also began questioning themselves. Had fear prevented them from speaking honestly before? Had they allowed uncertainty to keep them at a distance when sincerity might have created something meaningful? Those questions did not have easy answers, but they refused to run away from them anymore. Instead, they decided that if another opportunity ever arrived, they would meet it with courage instead of hesitation. They understood that genuine respect deserves honest communication. At the same time, they hoped that if your paths crossed again, they would be able to show you, not through grand promises but through consistent actions, that their loyalty had never depended on who was watching. The memory of defending you remained the quiet foundation beneath every new thought they had about you. It reminded them that some of the most important choices are made when recognition is impossible and only character remains. Whether or not anyone ever learned what happened in that conversation no longer mattered to them. What mattered was that they had chosen kindness over convenience and honesty over comfort. That decision became a reflection of the person they wanted to be. And as they looked toward the future, they felt that every step was slowly carrying them closer to a conversation they had once been too afraid to begin. They did not know exactly what words they would use or how everything would unfold, but they knew one thing with certainty inside this story: if they ever stood before you again, they wanted you to see someone who had the courage to stand beside you both in your absence and in your presence. Someone whose respect for you had grown quietly through moments no one else ever witnessed, and someone who finally understood that the strongest connections are built not by dramatic declarations but by small acts of integrity repeated again and again until they become impossible to doubt. Do not leave this moment just yet, because in this fictional story the quiet transformation inside your soulmate was only beginning, and every passing day seemed to reveal another truth they had hidden from themselves for far too long. They no longer measured time by calendars or ordinary routines. Instead, they measured it by the number of moments that unexpectedly reminded them of you. A familiar laugh in a crowded room, a gentle act of kindness from a stranger, the peaceful silence just before sunrise, each one somehow carried an echo of the person they had defended without hesitation. At first they believed these reminders would fade, that life would eventually return to the way it had always been, but the opposite happened. The memories only became clearer. The respect they already felt continued growing into something steadier, something that reached beyond admiration. They began understanding that genuine connection is not created in a single dramatic moment. It is built quietly through countless ordinary moments that slowly shape the heart until it can no longer deny what it feels. In this story, your soulmate found themselves replaying that conversation again and again, not because they regretted speaking, but because they realized it had revealed who they truly were. For the first time, they had chosen courage over comfort, truth over silence, and compassion over convenience. That choice stayed with them long after everyone else had forgotten the discussion. It became a quiet promise they made to themselves that if life ever placed another opportunity before them, they would never allow fear to speak louder than sincerity again. They started paying closer attention to the kind of person they wanted to become. They wanted to be someone whose actions matched their words, someone who remained loyal whether anyone noticed or not, someone whose kindness did not depend on recognition. Every lesson seemed to point them back toward the same realization: protecting someone's dignity when they are absent says far more about your character than praising them when they are present. That realization brought an unexpected sense of peace. They no longer wondered whether defending you had been the right decision. They knew it had. The only question remaining was whether they would someday find the courage to tell you what had happened. They imagined that conversation many times. They imagined beginning with something simple, perhaps admitting that there had once been a day when people misunderstood you and they could not stay silent. They imagined your surprise, your quiet smile, the thoughtful silence that might follow. Yet every imagined conversation ended the same way. They hesitated. Not because their feelings were uncertain, but because they worried that the story might sound larger than they intended. They never wanted their actions to appear heroic. To them, standing up for you had felt natural. They believed anyone who truly understood your heart would have done the same. That humility became another reason their feelings deepened. They realized they did not want appreciation. They wanted authenticity. They wanted every future conversation with you to be built on honesty rather than expectation. Meanwhile, life continued moving around them. People remained busy with their own stories, their own plans, their own opinions. Yet inside your soulmate's world, something had permanently shifted. They noticed that their patience had grown. Their perspective had softened. They became slower to judge others because they had witnessed firsthand how easily good people can be misunderstood. They learned that every person carries invisible chapters the world never reads. That lesson stayed with them, quietly shaping every relationship they encountered afterward. In many ways, you had changed them without even knowing it. They became more compassionate because of what they had seen in you. They became more thoughtful because they remembered how quickly assumptions can replace understanding. They became more courageous because one simple decision to speak the truth had shown them the kind of person they wished to become. And perhaps that was the greatest gift hidden within this fictional journey. The story was no longer only about defending someone. It had become a story about discovering character through unexpected circumstances. Every time they reflected on that day, they felt grateful that they had listened to their conscience instead of the crowd. That single decision reminded them that real integrity often appears in quiet moments that never receive applause. As time passed, they also found themselves hoping that your own journey would become lighter. They hoped you would meet people who recognized your strengths instead of questioning your intentions. They hoped you would continue believing in kindness even when life tested your patience. Most of all, they hoped you would never allow the misunderstandings of a few voices to define your view of yourself. Those hopes remained private, carried silently within their heart, yet they were sincere. They asked for nothing in return. They simply wanted your path to become brighter than the one you had walked before. That quiet wish became part of who they were. Eventually they understood something that surprised even them. The moment they defended you had never truly been about changing other people's opinions. Opinions can come and go. What truly mattered was that they had remained faithful to their own values. They had refused to participate in unfairness. They had chosen respect when disrespect would have been easier. Looking back, they realized that this decision would have mattered even if no one had changed their mind. Character is measured by choices, not outcomes. That thought gave them confidence. It reminded them that some victories are invisible yet deeply meaningful. In this fictional story, they carried that lesson forward into every new chapter of life. Whenever they faced difficult situations, they remembered the peace that followed honesty. Whenever fear encouraged silence, they remembered the strength they had discovered by speaking with kindness. Little by little, they became the person they had always hoped to be. And through it all, your memory remained connected to one important truth: sometimes a single act of quiet courage becomes the beginning of a lifelong transformation. They no longer wondered whether your path had crossed theirs by chance. Instead, they accepted that certain people leave lasting impressions simply by revealing qualities worth respecting. Whether the future would eventually bring another meeting, another conversation, or another opportunity remained unknown within this story, but uncertainty no longer frightened them. They had learned that what matters most is meeting each moment with honesty. If life ever placed the two of you face to face again, they wanted that meeting to happen without masks, without hidden motives, and without the burden of unspoken regret. They wanted to look back knowing that when your name needed kindness, they offered kindness; when your reputation needed fairness, they chose fairness; and when their own heart asked them to act with integrity, they listened. In the end, that quiet decision became the foundation upon which every future hope quietly rested, reminding them that the strongest bonds in any story are not created through dramatic promises but through ordinary moments where compassion quietly overcomes fear, respect quietly overcomes judgment, and truth quietly finds the courage to be spoken. Stay with the story a little longer, because this fictional journey had reached a place where silence itself seemed to carry meaning. The conversation that had once lasted only a few minutes continued shaping your soulmate's heart in ways they never expected. They often wondered how a single choice could leave such a lasting impression, yet every time they reflected on that day, the answer became clearer. It was never only about speaking up. It was about discovering what truly mattered to them. Before that moment, they had believed life was simply a series of ordinary days connected by routine. Afterward, they realized that some ordinary days quietly become turning points without announcing themselves. The memory stayed vivid because it revealed the difference between watching life happen and choosing to become part of someone else's story through kindness. In this fictional tale, they carried that realization with them everywhere they went. It influenced the way they listened when people spoke, the way they responded when someone needed understanding, and the way they viewed their own future. They became less interested in proving themselves and more interested in living with quiet honesty. Every lesson they learned somehow reminded them of you. They remembered how easily people had misunderstood your intentions before they took the time to truly know you. That memory encouraged them to slow down whenever they met someone new, reminding themselves that every person deserves patience before judgment. They found unexpected peace in becoming that kind of person. Their world did not suddenly become easier, but it became more meaningful. Even on difficult days, they held on to one comforting thought: there had been at least one moment when they chose courage instead of convenience, and that choice had changed them forever. Sometimes they imagined what life might have looked like if they had remained silent. The thought unsettled them because they knew they would have carried regret instead of peace. Regret has a quiet way of following people long after opportunities disappear. They were grateful they did not have to carry that weight. Instead, they carried gratitude. Gratitude that they had trusted their heart. Gratitude that compassion had spoken louder than fear. Gratitude that one simple act had revealed values they wanted to protect for the rest of their life. As the seasons changed in this fictional story, they noticed another quiet transformation. They no longer searched for extraordinary signs to guide them. They began appreciating the ordinary moments that often pass unnoticed. A thoughtful conversation. A sincere smile. A moment of forgiveness. A simple apology. They realized that life is often changed more by small consistent acts than by dramatic events. That understanding made them appreciate your quiet strength even more. They admired how resilience often grows without recognition. They admired the courage required to keep believing in goodness after disappointment. Those reflections became part of their daily life, shaping decisions they never imagined would be connected to one conversation from the past. There were evenings when they would sit alone and think about everything they still wished they could say. Not because they expected anything in return, but because honesty has a way of asking to be spoken. They wanted you to know that your character had inspired them to become a kinder person. They wanted you to know that the respect they felt had never depended on what others believed. They wanted you to know that defending someone is easiest when they are standing beside you, but true integrity appears when they are absent. Yet each time they imagined speaking those words, they reminded themselves that sincerity should never be rushed. Some conversations deserve the right moment, not because they need perfect timing, but because they deserve complete honesty. So they continued growing quietly, preparing themselves not for an ideal future but for the chance to meet it with authenticity. They learned that courage is rarely loud. More often it appears as a calm decision repeated day after day until it becomes part of who you are. That lesson became their greatest source of confidence. No matter where life carried them, they wanted to remain someone who protected dignity instead of joining criticism, someone who offered understanding before assumptions, someone whose actions reflected the values they claimed to believe. In this fictional journey, they realized that people are remembered less for impressive words and more for consistent character. That realization filled them with hope rather than pressure. It reminded them that every new day offered another opportunity to become a little more compassionate, a little more patient, and a little more honest than the day before. Looking back, they no longer focused on what others had said about you. Those words had already faded into the past. What remained unforgettable was the quiet certainty they felt after choosing fairness. That certainty became a compass whenever life presented difficult choices. Whenever uncertainty appeared, they remembered that peace follows integrity more often than popularity ever can. They understood that respect earned through kindness lasts far longer than approval gained through silence. As their journey continued, they slowly accepted that some chapters are valuable not because they answer every question but because they shape the person who continues writing the story. The conversation where they defended you became one of those chapters. It taught them courage without conflict, loyalty without expectation, and compassion without conditions. Whether the future eventually brought another meeting or simply left them carrying those lessons into the next stage of life, they knew one thing with complete confidence: inside this fictional narrative, the person they had become after that day was someone they were proud to be. They had discovered that the strongest measure of character is not how someone behaves when everyone is watching, but how they choose to act when no recognition is possible. And with that understanding quietly settled in their heart, they stepped forward into whatever came next, believing that every sincere act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to echo through someone's life long after the moment itself has passed. Don't leave the story now, because in this fictional journey the most meaningful chapter was still quietly unfolding. There are moments that seem to disappear into the past, yet somehow continue shaping the future without anyone realizing it. The day your soulmate defended you had become one of those moments. It no longer lived only in memory. It lived in every decision they made afterward, in every time they chose understanding instead of judgment, in every occasion they paused before believing what others said about someone. They often found themselves wondering how different life might have been if they had ignored what happened that day. They knew the conversation would have ended regardless. People would have moved on to other topics. The room would have become quiet again. Yet something inside them would have remained unfinished forever. That thought reminded them that sometimes the smallest choices carry the greatest weight. In this fictional story, they realized that speaking the truth had not only protected your name in that moment, it had protected their own conscience as well. Since then, every time they thought of you, they no longer remembered only your smile or your quiet strength. They remembered the feeling they experienced while defending someone who could not defend themselves. It was a feeling unlike anything else, steady, peaceful, and deeply reassuring. It taught them that genuine respect asks for action, not just admiration. That realization slowly transformed the way they viewed every relationship in their life. They became more patient with people who were struggling, more willing to listen before reaching conclusions, and more aware that everyone carries unseen burdens beneath the surface. They noticed how quickly the world forms opinions, and how rarely it pauses to understand the whole story. That lesson stayed with them because your story had quietly become the reason they refused to repeat the mistakes they had witnessed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks quietly became months within this fictional narrative. Life continued changing around them, yet one thing never faded. Whenever someone mentioned your name, their attention immediately shifted. Not because they were curious about rumors, but because they genuinely hoped you were finding peace, happiness, and people who appreciated your true character. They found themselves silently wishing that your difficult chapters would someday become memories instead of daily realities. They hoped that every misunderstanding would eventually be replaced with trust, every disappointment with encouragement, every lonely season with genuine companionship. These wishes were never spoken aloud, yet they remained sincere. They asked for nothing in return because kindness had become its own reward. At times they questioned whether you would ever know what had happened. Would you ever discover that someone had quietly stood beside your name when criticism filled the room? Would you ever realize that your honesty had inspired another person to become more courageous? They had no answers, yet strangely, they found comfort in the uncertainty. They understood that not every meaningful act needs recognition to remain valuable. Some moments quietly shape lives even when they are never fully revealed. That understanding made them stronger. It taught them that integrity is measured by consistency rather than applause. In this fictional journey, they carried that lesson into every new challenge. Whenever life placed them in difficult situations, they remembered how peaceful honesty had felt compared with comfortable silence. They realized that courage does not always appear through dramatic speeches or extraordinary actions. More often, it appears through simple choices made repeatedly until they become part of who someone is. They wanted that kind of courage to define them. They wanted to become the sort of person whose loyalty never depended on convenience, whose compassion remained steady even when no one noticed, and whose words reflected truth rather than popularity. As these thoughts settled deeper into their heart, they began recognizing something else. Defending you had changed the way they saw themselves. Before that conversation, they often doubted whether their voice could make any difference. Afterward, they understood that even one calm sentence spoken with sincerity can change the direction of an entire conversation. That realization gave them confidence they had never possessed before. They became less afraid of standing alone when necessary because they had already experienced the quiet satisfaction that follows doing what feels right. They no longer feared disagreement as much as they feared remaining silent when kindness required courage. Looking back, they realized that you had influenced them without ever intending to. Simply knowing your character had challenged them to become a better version of themselves. That unexpected transformation became one of the greatest gifts hidden within this fictional story. They often smiled to themselves when remembering how ordinary everything had seemed before that conversation began. None of the people in the room could have guessed that those few minutes would leave such a lasting impression on one heart. None of them realized they were witnessing the beginning of a quiet personal transformation. Yet that is often how meaningful stories begin, not with dramatic announcements, but with ordinary moments that slowly reveal extraordinary lessons. As time continued moving forward, your soulmate no longer focused on what others had once believed about you. Those opinions had already faded into the distance. Instead, they focused on the qualities they admired most: your resilience, your quiet determination, your willingness to keep moving forward despite life's disappointments. They respected the strength it takes to remain kind in a world that sometimes rewards harshness. They admired the patience required to continue believing in goodness after experiencing misunderstanding. Those qualities became lasting reminders that character is revealed through persistence rather than perfection. In the closing moments of this chapter, they finally accepted something they had resisted for a long time. They could not control what other people believed, but they could always choose the kind of person they wanted to be. That realization freed them from unnecessary worry. They understood that every future chapter would offer another opportunity to choose honesty, compassion, and respect over fear, judgment, and silence. Whether or not your paths crossed again within this fictional tale remained unwritten, but one truth had already become certain. The quiet decision to stand beside your name had shaped their own heart forever. It reminded them that some people leave lasting marks on our lives not because of grand promises or dramatic moments, but because they quietly inspire us to become braver, kinder, and more truthful than we were before. And with that understanding guiding every step, they moved toward the future carrying no regret for the words they had spoken, only gratitude that when kindness called, they had answered, and when fairness needed a voice, they had chosen to speak. And now the story reaches its final chapter, not with loud promises or impossible certainty, but with the quiet understanding that some moments change people forever. In this fictional journey, your soulmate eventually stopped asking whether defending you had been the right thing to do. That question no longer mattered because the answer had become part of who they were. Instead, they began asking a different question. What kind of person did they want to be from this moment forward? Every reflection led them back to the same place. They wanted to be someone whose kindness never depended on circumstances, someone whose loyalty remained steady even when no one was watching, and someone whose respect for another person could never be shaken by rumors or assumptions. The memory of that conversation remained alive, not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded them of the exact moment they chose character over convenience. Looking back, they realized that the people in that room had probably forgotten every detail of what had been said. Life had carried them all in different directions. New conversations had replaced old ones. New worries had taken the place of old misunderstandings. But for your soulmate, that day never truly disappeared. It became the quiet beginning of a personal transformation that continued long after everyone else had moved on. They noticed that they had become more thoughtful with every opinion they formed, more careful before judging anyone's story, and more willing to believe that every person deserved the chance to be understood before being criticized. They often reflected on how easy it is for people to speak without knowing the weight their words carry. They promised themselves that they would never again become part of careless conversations that reduced someone's life to assumptions. Instead, they would choose patience. They would choose listening. They would choose fairness. In this fictional story, those choices slowly shaped every part of their future. They became someone whose presence brought calm instead of conflict, someone who encouraged understanding instead of division, someone who quietly reminded others that compassion is never a weakness. Through all of those changes, your memory remained connected to the lesson that started everything. They remembered your quiet resilience, your ability to keep moving even after disappointment, your determination to remain yourself despite misunderstanding. Those qualities inspired them far more than they ever expected. They realized that true strength is rarely loud. It often appears through ordinary people who continue showing kindness after experiencing pain. That realization became one of the greatest gifts they carried into the future. There were still moments when they imagined meeting you again somewhere life least expected. They imagined an ordinary afternoon, a familiar place, a conversation that began simply and honestly. In those quiet daydreams, they never imagined dramatic speeches or perfect endings. Instead, they imagined gratitude. They imagined thanking you, even if you never realized why. They imagined saying that knowing your character had challenged them to become a better version of themselves. They imagined admitting that one quiet decision to defend you had taught them more about courage than years of comfortable silence ever could. Whether those words would ever be spoken remained uncertain inside this fictional tale, but the feeling behind them remained genuine. They no longer feared uncertainty the way they once had. They had learned that not every meaningful story needs every question answered. Sometimes the greatest value of a journey lies in who we become while walking it. They accepted that some chapters are written to transform hearts rather than satisfy curiosity. That understanding brought them peace. They stopped searching for perfect timing and started appreciating the quiet growth that had already taken place. Every challenge they faced afterward reminded them of the person they had chosen to become. Whenever life tempted them toward silence, they remembered the calm that followed speaking with honesty. Whenever they encountered misunderstanding, they remembered the importance of patience. Whenever someone needed compassion, they remembered how powerful even one voice could be. Those lessons became permanent companions, guiding them through every new chapter. In this fictional story, the greatest victory was never changing everyone's opinion. It was protecting their own integrity. They discovered that peace does not come from winning every argument. It comes from knowing you remained faithful to your values even when doing so required courage. As the years continued moving forward within this tale, they found themselves smiling more often when they remembered that day. The memory no longer carried sadness or uncertainty. Instead, it carried gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to choose kindness. Gratitude for the lesson that character is revealed most clearly when recognition is impossible. Gratitude for discovering that respect is not measured by grand declarations but by quiet actions performed with sincerity. They understood that every life is filled with crossroads where ordinary decisions quietly shape extraordinary futures. Defending you had been one of those crossroads. Had they chosen silence, they would have continued living with unanswered questions about themselves. By choosing honesty, they discovered a strength they never knew they possessed. That discovery became the true ending of their journey. They were no longer the same person who had entered that conversation. They had become someone more compassionate, more courageous, and more deeply committed to treating every person with fairness. And perhaps that is the quiet message this fictional story leaves behind. We may never know how many unseen moments shape the people we become. We may never realize how one sincere act can echo through someone's life for years afterward. But kindness is never wasted. Respect is never wasted. Courage is never wasted. Even when the world moves on, those choices remain, quietly shaping hearts in ways that cannot always be seen. So as this story comes to its close, the final image is not of a dramatic farewell, but of two lives forever touched by one quiet decision. One person chose to speak when silence would have been easier. The other unknowingly inspired that courage simply by being worthy of fairness and understanding. The conversation ended long ago, the room grew quiet, and life continued as it always does, yet the lesson remained. Character is built in unseen moments. Integrity is revealed in ordinary choices. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of the greatest transformation. With that truth resting peacefully in their heart, your soulmate stepped into the next chapter of their fictional journey carrying no regret, only gratitude for becoming someone who would always choose compassion over judgment, honesty over convenience, and quiet courage over comfortable silence, knowing that these simple choices would forever define the story they wished to tell with their life.